Birds. You've heard of them, likely seen them in your life, eaten them most likely, and for the most part, you probably would think that they couldn't be all that contentious in any context. Indeed, I, the Dark Master. Hello there. Find them to be the least interesting of the major groups of animals. I'm far more of an invertebrate, fish, amphibians, and reptile guy. But still, no shame on them. They have been very successful and impacted human culture in both good and, the subject of this video, controversial ways. Speaking of the subject, we shall be talking about Rhynchophanes mccownii, more well known as McCown's Longspur, or the thick-billed Longspur. But before we get to how controversial this poor little birdie is, I think it would be best to answer the question you most likely have. What is the McCown's Longspur? Well, to answer that, we'll have to go back long before any bird you knew existed, back into the Mesozoic. Dinosaurs, you know them, you love them. They are beyond the need for an introduction, being the dominant animals of the Mesozoic, after the Triassic extinction wiped out the formerly dominant terrestrial crocodile relatives. They had already divided into two groups, the Ornithischians, so named for their ancestrally bird-shaped hips, despite being completely unrelated to birds. Nice job there. They contain many famous dinosaurs such as ceratopsians, pachycephalosaurs, ornithopods, stegosaurs, and ankylosaurs. The second and more relevant branch of the dinosaurs are the Saurischia, whose name comes from the supposed reptile-like hips present ancestrally, though they lost that in later forms and they got bird-shaped hips, so They are divided into three major groups. The superficially theropod-like herosaurids, who are an enigmatic group we shall move on from, but are believed to predate the split between the other two, and died out at the end of Triassic mass extinction event. There was the Sauropodomorpha, famous for containing the largest land animals to ever live, becoming long-necked dominant herbivores, which include, such things as Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus. Lastly, we come to the final and most important subdivision, the Theropoda, which were the apex predators of the world post the Triassic extinction event, which are distinguished from their superficially similar relatives by Proaxilia tenestra, cervical vertebrae with various unique shapes, and several other minor aspects. Outside of a few basal taxa, like the infamous Dilophosaurus, which are of uncertain placement, and in life would have been far bigger than the movies depict, the vast majority of theropods are divided into two groups. First are the coelophysoids, made famous by the coelophysis seen in Walking with Dinosaurs, which were small predators that were quite common during the Jurassic, but petered out in the early Jurassic as competition from later theropods started to impact them. Speaking of the second branch, we have the Averostra, who have reduced their foot bones, leading to the iconic footprint associated with birds and theropods, with, the three toes. It is itself divided into two main groups. There is Ceratosauria, a group of, in many cases, bizarre theropods, primarily from the southern hemisphere, like the snaggle-toothed Masiacasaurus, or the tiny-armed Carnotaurus. More relevant are the Tetanurae, who are distinguished by their tails being stiffened and a sophisticated set of air sacs, which, would eventually lead to birds. Outside of some basal forms, the Tetanurae are divided into two groups. The Megalosauroids, which, while admittedly some of the most generic theropods ever exist, contain one of the first dinosaurs discovered, Megalosaurus, and the infamous sailback Spinosaurus, which contained the largest theropod to ever exist, Spinosaurus, and the Avitheropoda, which as the name suggests are closer to birds. They are themselves divided into two clades. First are the Carnosauria, formerly a sort of wastebasket taxon for any large theropod. Upon further research, it was found to only really consist of the famous allosaurs and their relatives, like the massive descendants that had shark-like teeth, the Carcharodontosaurs, who dominated in both hemispheres in the Jurassic and into the early Cretaceous. The other branch of the Avitheropoda are the Coelurosauria, which are the first theropods with non-controversial evidence for the presence of feathers. Earlier ones didn't have it, as far as we can tell. It consists of various famous groups like the Tyrannosaurs, the ostrich-mimicking Ornithomimosaurs, the big-armed and mysterious Megaraptora, the cute little Compsognathids, and lastly, the group relevant for the rest of this video, the Maniraptora, distinguished by three-fingered hands, a half-moon-shaped corpus on the hand that allowed folding in a manner akin to sort of flapping one's wings, and various other minor aspects that are more in line with birds than other theropods. There are many groups, from the strange Alvarosauroids with their secondarily reduced arms that may have been the dinosaur equivalent of anteaters, the Therizinosaurs, which decided to abandon the whole flesh-eating thing and embrace the sloth. Most relevant of these are the Penaraptora, which is defined as the dinosaurs with the first complex feathers, i.e. more than just fuzz seen in earlier dinosaurs and baby birds today. They are divided into three main groups. The Oviraptorosauria, often mischaracterized as being egg eaters, they likely could be best described as cassowaries with claws, and were once thought to be flightless early birds. That's how similar they were. The Scansauropterygids, which developed a set of bat-like webbed hands that seemingly would have allowed them to glide/fly in a way entirely independent of those of birds, and lastly the Paraaves, which can be best described as birds and their closest dinosaurian relatives. This group includes the famous knife-toed dromaeosaurids, like Velociraptor, and the less famous Troodontids, which includes Troodon, which may or may not be valid. That's an own can of worms we don't have time to get into, and various other bird-like animals not relevant to this video. Finally, in the late Jurassic, we see the first birds of the Avialae. But what was this first bird? As a bit contentious due to a combination of low sample sizes, poor preservation due to the small size of these animals, and the fact that they just looked extremely similar to a bunch of the other small feathered dinosaurs around, like velociraptors and Ichthyornis around the time. The oldest and least controversial of these is Archaeopteryx, dating to 150.8 million years ago in what is now Europe, which at the time was Archipelago. Ichthyornis and Zhou are a bit older, but both are far more contentious, dating to around 160 and 165 million years respectively, so I don't really want to mention them because, they may or may not be true birds, while Archaeopteryx pretty solidly is one. None of these could fly all that well, though, due to not having a fully formed wishbone. If you think that reaching true birds that were close to being done, no. We got a lot more. Outside of some basal forms like the aforementioned three and the Geholornithids, all birds fall within the Avibracata, or as their name means, the birds with short tails, and this is the main trait that distinguished them from all the earlier, as they have 10 or fewer tail vertebrae. They are divided into two groups, the basal omnivorpterygids from the early Cretaceous of China, and the Pygostylia, so named for the possession of the pygostyle, often called the bishop's nose or pope's nose, at the end of an even shorter tail, which is made from a bunch of fused tail vertebrae. They are divided into three subgroups as we finally reach the point where they all start to look actually a lot like modern birds, albeit only from distance. First up are the Gingophorticids, noted for a unique fusion of the scapula and saracoid bones. There are the Confucianorthids, who were the first truly proficient flyers in bird evolution. Seemingly, they lost their teeth independently of the lineage to modern birds, as we see that the lineage that leads to modern birds still had them at this point. Both of these were short-lived, being only known from the early Cretaceous of China. The last subcategory, however, the Ornithothoraces, were far more successful. They get their name, which means bird thoraxes, due to them possessing the highly advanced anatomy of the thorax seen in modern birds, like a large keeled wishbone, elongated coracoids, and modern style joints, allowing for good flight. It consists of two main groups. First are the Ichthyornis, often called opposite birds due to their concave socket joint of the scapula, aka shoulder blade, and the coracoid, i.e. the primary bone seen in the shoulder girdle, being made in an opposite manner of those of modern birds. They were the dominant terrestrial bird groups, filling the niches of many modern tree-dwelling birds today, like hawks, owls, and pigeons. The second group are the Euornithes, or true birds, who are defined by having the modern shoulders that aren't the opposite, like of those of the Ichthyornis. It is divided into several further subdivisions. There are the basal ambiortiforms, the gansuids, the yanornithiforms, the patagoniformes, which are superficially ostrich-like guys that secondarily lost flight and lived in South America, and lastly the Ornithurae. The Ornithurae are distinguished by the possession of the first fully modern pygostyle and having, at least ancestrally, the flying capabilities of modern birds. Outside of some basal forms, it is divided into four major groups. First are the highly enigmatic chemopterygids, from which we know little. There's the Ichthyornis, which are kind of like gulls but with teeth, likely retaining them due to it allowing them to better catch fish. The Hesperornithes, a group that lost flight and became these sort of demonic hell penguins. I wouldn't want to get bit by those guys. Sadly, the end Cretaceous mass extinction event wiped out all the birds, and by extension all dinosaurs, except for the aves, which are the modern birds. And, it's just kind of a shame we lost so much. These guys have completely lost their teeth, and despite the name modern birds, these guys date back to the Maastrichtian stage of the late Cretaceous. The reason they survived while the rest died out is due to a combination of being primarily generalistic waders / ground dwellers, and honestly plain luck. Regardless, we have finally reached the groups that are still alive today. Surely we're almost done, right? Well, they are divided into two groups, primarily distinguished by the shape of the palate, and both split off prior to the mass extinction that ended the Mesozoic. First up are the Paleognaths, which means old jaws, due to allegedly being more primitive and having more reptilian-like palates. But really, as you've seen, they're actually quite recent, and while initially could fly like the still-living tinamous of South America, are much more famous for the numerous flightless forms like kiwis, emus, cassowaries, ostriches, rheas, and the extinct moas and elephant birds. In total, there are about 50 species. Far more diverse by an order of magnitude are the neognaths, or young jaws for their more derived palates, and consist of more than 10,000 species, more than all mammal groups combined. They are divided into three orders: the now extinct but magnificent odontopterygoforms, more well known as the false-toothed birds for their tooth-like growths that grow from their beak and are distinct from those of modern birds. They were massive seabirds emerging in the Paleocene and were the dominant seabirds for quite a long time, with some reaching a 20-foot wingspan. But sadly, due to climate change, they died out right as the first humans, Homo habilis, evolved. The next group are the Pangalaceae, known for containing waterfowl such as ducks and a lot of landfowl like chickens and turkeys. Far larger are the neoaves, which are divided into 11 main groups. Their exact taxonomy is, very contested, but according to the most recent paper I could find, the most basal are the Mirandornithines, which include flamingos, grebes, and their extinct relatives. Next, we see a pair of groups often put into the proposed grouping of Columba aves, the Columba morphae, which includes pigeons and their more obscure relatives like the sand grouse of Asia and mesite birds of Madagascar, and the second group are the Otidomorphae, which includes cuckoos, bustards, and the turacos, one of the only bird families endemic entirely to Africa. Going forward, we again see a split. First is the contentious clade Elementornes, who are so named for their highly diverse ecological roles. These include the monotypic opisthocomiforms, represented by the living Hoatzin, gruiforms, which consists of cranes, rails, and their relatives, the ceratiforms, that includes birds such as waders, gulls, and auks, the strissorthes, often called night birds, which includes nightjars, oilbirds, putus, swifts, and surprisingly enough, hummingbirds, the Euripigomorphae, which includes the tropic birds, the sunbittern, and the kagu of New Caledonia, and the Aguilorthines, which includes loons, penguins, albatrosses, storks, shearwaters, petrels, pelicans, herons, ibises, frigate birds, cormorants, gannets, and all their relatives. Sister to the Elementaves are the group relevant for the rest of this video. The Telleraves, often called the land birds, identified mostly by genetic studies, they are divided into two groups. The Afroaves, that evolved first in, what do you guess, Africa, and include birds of prey such as owls, hawks, ospreys, and the like, mouse birds, trogons, quetzals, hornbills, kingfishers, woodpeckers, and the cuckoo rowler, whatever the heck that's supposed to be. The second group, the Australaves, seem to have originated in the southern hemisphere, possibly Australia or South America. They consist of several groups. Most basal are the Cariniforms, which includes the two living Serena birds and the infamous forest rakids, known as terror birds, that ruled South America alongside other more obscure basal relatives, like Bathornithids, Amergornithids, and Ichthyornis. Next up, we see the Falconiforms, which includes falcons and their basal relatives. We lastly come to the Piscatocopaciers, notable for their ability to do great vocal sounds. They consist of various basal genera and two living orders, the Piscatoformes, aka parrots, and the Passeriformes, the perching birds. The name comes from their unique foot structure, as well as several unique tendons in the leg that allow them to perch much better than other birds, even while sleeping. They are extremely diverse, outnumbering all other bird groups combined. They are principally divided into two clades. The first are the basal Acanthistini, represented by a single family, the New Zealand wrens, endemic to, well, where else but New Zealand, and are flightless. Sadly, due to the actions of man, only two species remain of this formerly diverse group. The remaining passerines belong to the eupasserines, or true passerines, that underwent extreme diversification and have split into two suborders that seem to have separated due to the breakup of Gondwana, and saw numerous adaptive radiations and are primarily distinguished by hard-to-explain differences in the syntrix, which is a musculature that is, the main organ used for vocalization in these birds. First are the Tyranni, whose syrinx mostly leads to a more mechanical sound, though they still can be quite beautiful. They originated in South America and consist of around 1,392 species, such as ovenbirds, antbirds, flycatchers, pittas, broadbills, crescent chests, manakins, cotingas, titiras, gnat-eaters, antpittaras, and thrushes, tapaculos, and sapoya. The second of these suborders, and relevant for us, are the passerii, known as the songbirds for their much more elaborate songs. It is divided into a number of parvors, which contain the remaining 5,000 or so species of birds. First are the Menurivides, which include the lyrebirds and the scrubbirds. The Climacterides include bowerbirds and Australian tree creepers. Melamphagides includes the bristlebirds, honey-eaters, fairy wrens, and relatives. Much more famous are the Corvids, which include crows, ravens, durongos, jays, shrikes, birds of paradise, and many, many more related forms. Second to last, we got the Muscipeda, which are known for containing the true wrens of the family Troglodytidae and many, many related birds, like thrushes, waxwings, mockingbirds, tree creepers, wall creepers, oxpeckers, and many, many more. Lastly, the final parvorder is Passerida, which is usually divided into three subgroups, though the Muscipoidea has since been given its own parvorder, so let's focus on the other two for now. First are the Sylvoideae, a superfamily which includes many species and 23 families. Having originated in the Indo-Pacific, they've spread in high numbers to Eurasia and tropical Africa. Meanwhile, there are few in the Americas, and are represented by such animals as white-eyes, bush warblers, larks, nicators, bush tits, martins, bulbuls, and all sorts of other animals like grass birds and relatives. Lastly are the Passeroideae, which seem to have originated in Eurasia and are primarily small herbivores found throughout northern Eurasia and North America. They are divided into 25 families. Starting with the basal ones, you got the Passeridae, the true sparrows, which indeed are the average sparrows and contain around 41 species. There's the Prunellidae, better known as the Centaurs, that hold 12 species. The Estrelidae, which consist of around 140 species, often called waxbills. The Plocoideae, better known as weavers, consist of around 120 species or so. The Viduridae, also known as the Widas, consist of about 20 species or so, and the monotypic Urosynchromidae, represented by the shockingly boring Przewalski's finch. The remaining families are grouped into a clade that is often called the 9 primaried Oscines, due to how they all have 9 visible primary feathers on each wing. 3 basal families are known. These include the Motacillidae, more often called wagtails and pipits, consist of around 70 species. The Fringillidae, better known as the true finches, consisting of around 235 species found worldwide outside of Australia. And in contrast, there is the monotypic, i.e. only one species, Pseudodramatidae, represented by the olive warbler. The remaining 16 families are collected into the final larger clade we shall be discussing, the Emberizidoidea, called the New World 9 primary Oscines. These guys split from their Old World relatives we discussed earlier in the Miocene around 15 million years ago, having crossed over the Bering Strait and underwent an extreme adaptive radiation of species. Most basal of these are the monotypic Rhododimicidae, represented in the form of the rosy thrush tanager. The second most basal branched off are a pair of families that managed to have members return to the Old World, but we'll return to those in a bit. Other notable birds include the tanagers of the family Thrapidae, New World sparrows of the Passellidae, the New World orioles of the Theteridae, and the cardinals of the Cardinalidae. But going back to those two that left the New World and partially re-entered the Old one, First are the buntings of the family Emberizidae, which consists of 44 species found throughout Eurasia and Africa. More relevant for us is their sister group, the Calcaridae, better known as the Longspurs, who split off from their relatives at the end of the Miocene. This family is found in Eurasia and the Americas and consists of 3 genera, which seem to have split up sometime in the Pliocene. Most basal is the genus Calcareus, consisting of 3 species, the Lapland longspur, Calcareus laponicus, Smith's longspur, Calcareus pictus, and the chestnut longspur, Calcareus ornatus. Next up is the genus Plectiophymax, which consists of 2 species, the snow bunting Plecotrophynax nivalis and McKay's bunting Plecophylaxnax hyperboreus. Finally, we come across the final genus and the subject for the rest of this video, McCown's longspur. Now that we've finally reached it, let's talk about it now for the next major chapter of this video. McCown's longspur is a fairly average bird. It reaches only 5.9 inches in length, with a wingspan of 11 inches and a weight of 0.88 ounces. And in terms of coloration, they display notable sexual dimorphism. Females at all times of the year are generally brownish in coloration with cryptic darker brown colors and patterns. Males in non-breeding seasons are similar, but with a more prominent set of spots around the head's crown as opposed to the female's stripes. Breeding males, however, are far more distinct, with a paler colored bill, a whitish throat and underbelly, grayish face, a black cap on the head, and rusty orange prominent blotches on the wings. The young of both sexes are sandy colored with a lot of cryptic colors. Using its fairly average-sized beak, this bird feeds on all sorts of arthropods like grasshoppers, beetles, butterflies, and seeds. In terms of habitat, these are birds of the sparsely vegetated regions of the Americas, such as pastures, plains, arid steppes, plowed fields, short grass prairies, and even in some cases, dried-up riverbeds and lake beds. Their distribution is primarily American, with them historically being found in northern Mexico, Texas, and southern Oklahoma, while in their non-breeding range. Spring sees them migrate north through the states of New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas into their breeding range, which historically includes northern Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and southern Canada. Populations in Oklahoma, Minnesota, and Manitoba once are known, but they died out due to human land use. Speaking of breeding season, the male's mating song is somewhat simple, tinkling song, which I'll show later because it actually ties into certain aspects of why it's controversial. After mating, the female will create a pretty pathetic nest of little more than a shallow depression scratched out of the ground. There, the female will lay from 2 to up to 5 eggs. After an incubation period on average about 12 days, both males and females feed the young, who will then fledge after an average of about 10 days, though it can be a little longer depending on the context. They seemingly often occur in large flocks alongside the closely related Lapland longspur and the less closely related shore lark, Eremophilia alpestris. As you can tell, this is quite the generic bird. Sure, it might just be my general apathy towards the clade, but I think even big bird fans will probably admit that in comparison to other birds, it's not particularly notable. It's just kind of there. For this reason, in comparison to the likes of the gypsy moth or even the creatures of the Burmese amber, which have gotten a lot of art and media, both of which, I've discussed in past nature documentaries where I discussed the controversies related to both those subjects, so check those out if you're interested. In comparison to those, McCown's Longspur has had a fairly minor impact on human culture after it was scientifically described in 1851 by the American businessman and ornithologist George Newbold Lawrence and named in honor of the man who actually discovered them and provided the first specimens, John Porter McCown. Keep his name in mind, he'll be relevant later. Little art or any sort of cultural stuff has been done with the species. There's no songs, poems, or media. The few art are mostly scientific in nature. Indeed, this species has seemingly been forgotten until a controversy erupted. But how could such an average bird be controversial? Well, that will be the subject of the final chapters of this video, so without further ado, let's dive right into it.
Because I just can't with that history. In accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, this court...
Alright, so the controversy doesn't really start with the bird itself, as there's a lot of broader context we have to discuss. While there were some rumblings in 2018, they were rightfully ignored because they weren't really big of an issue. But the trouble really began and was likely an unsurprising time, 2020. This shithole of a year. It amazes me how much of the stuff I've discussed starts then. And basically, if you don't forget, there were violent mobs sent off by the police killing of a guy who doesn't need to be named. It's funny because these riots supposedly, meant to help black people, overwhelmingly destroyed millions upon millions of dollars of property, the overwhelming majority of which were black-owned or primarily employed black people, and there are a lot of people who were killed in those riots, most of which were black, but good job, guys. However, much more relevant is an event that happened on the exact same day, which some people imply there was a bit of a conspiracy theory due to it, but in reality, these two events are completely unrelated, and none of the people involved even knew who George Floyd was. So, yeah, it's just a bad timing is all. Often called the Central Park bird watching incident on May 25th, 2020, involving Amy Cooper, a white woman dog walker, and a black bird watcher, Christian Cooper. Yes, they both have the last name Cooper, though there's no blood relationship there. In none other than where else but Central Park, the sole piece of nature in the hellscape of concrete that is the New York City area. The story, as most in the mainstream media and left-wing sources will tell you, is that Amy Cooper, the deranged, megalomaniac racist who epitomizes the word Karen, calls police on the innocent black man, trying to get him lynched, who only was concerned for dogs harming innocent birds. You see this trite in the likes of the Young Turks, Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, and the like.
So she's sending people with guns to go find a black man who has endangered the life of her, she claims, to the police. It puts him in mortal danger. I mean, we just did the story of George Floyd.
Remember the Central Park Karen, Amy Cooper, who called the police because she was threatened and frightened by a bird watcher who happened to be a black man who was posing no threat to her?
America has a sordid and a very long history of mistreatment of blacks, of men and women, both by white men who decided that black men are inferior, and white women who adopt that same attitude of superiority. A black man would dare to assert his own humanity.
Dog, this white woman goes nuts because she's a racist, ladies.
Is this true? Well, no. For the truth, much like always, is much more nuanced than that. For one, let's properly introduce the two people involved. Amy Cooper is a portfolio manager with a solid personal life who is most regards considered extremely charitable and has helped multiple women flee abusive relationships. She has a college education with a history of deep appreciation for animals, as she often volunteers to walk dogs. In contrast, Christian Cooper seems to have not done much in his life prior to this incident, outside of working on a collection of, from what I can tell, are mediocre comics and writings only notable for meaningless identity politics reasons, such as being the first person to make a gay guy in Star Trek. I don't know how genuine that is, but it's kind of telling that something so superficial is the only notable attribute of his fictional characters. He also seemingly worked for GLAAD, a supposedly pro-LGBT organization, most notable for their leader/CEO, Sarah Kate Ellis, who has been accused of falsely appropriating money, as well as just generally lacking in financial transparency. Now, very interesting that Christian Cooper hasn't really talked about that, by the way. Let us now get back on topic and discuss the event itself and dispute some of the silly arguments and misinformation that is associated with it. In reality, and something Christian Cooper even admits to in the very Facebook message, is that he intended to lure her dog away with food in order to steal it. Conveniently, no one who discusses this event from a progressive lens ever discusses this. They always imply that the guy was just minding his own business until, she attacked him. So yeah, he quite literally instigated this entire conflict. And this isn't a one-time thing either. He also threatened the pets of other dog walkers like Jerome Lockett and two others who wished to remain anonymous due to the backlash Amy got and due to both being white and thinking that they might face similar issues.
I make nothing of it because sometimes people tell us to leash our dogs, but we're just passing through quickly and we don't allow our dogs to go chasing birds or anything, so what's the harm? Well, a few days later, we're in there and Christian had no idea his name or that this was the same guy my friend mentioned to me days ago, comes yelling from about 10 yards away, "You need to leash your dog. They can't be off leash in here." We both take a few steps back, and my friend asks him if he works for the park, and he says no. So we say, "Sounds good. Have a good one." And when we turn our back, he starts to try and make these noises to call our dogs to him. I yelled, "Don't try and call my dog to you." He then says, "If you're going to do what you want, then I'm going to do what I want, but you're not going to like it." Me, "What? Are you threatening me and my dog?" Christian bends down while gripping his black Vespa helmet attached to his side and starts calling my dog by clapping and says, "Come here, puppy, come here." I then ran over to him and pushed him away before he got too close to my dog. He then yelled for someone to record it, but the two white men he was with seemed uninterested. I said, "Never effing touch someone's dog that isn't threatening you, and never threaten me again." Then I walked away with my dog, my friend, and his dogs. As a black man, I'm not scared of another person because their race or ethnicity, but this man is threatening with his body language and screaming. I don't know Amy Cooper at all. I've said hello to her because that's what dog owners do to other dog owners in the park. But when I saw that video, I thought, I cannot imagine if he approached her the same way, how she may have been genuinely afraid for her life. She may not be like me, willing to physically defend herself or her dog. I understand the optics of this video aren't great, but people need to understand this man is a dick and probably did threaten her. You can read his Facebook post where he tells the world he told her, "You're not going to like what I'm going to do next." That's a threat. And she has no idea if this man is pulling out a knife, a gun, or a treat that's laced with rat poison. If I wasn't who I was, I would have called the police on that guy too. Sure, we're breaking the rules by having our dogs off leash in a park that has 80% of its area off leash hours, but that gives that guy no authority to accost people in such manner. My two fellow dog owners have had similar situations with this man, but don't feel comfortable coming forward because they're white. They think they'll be seen as some Karen or whatever. I obviously don't have that fear.
So yes, Christian Cooper was aggressive and threatening her, or at the very least engaging in behaviors that one could understandably consider threatening. It's not white tears or hysteria. It is reasonable for her to be slightly concerned or scared of the guy, when even other men are. This is especially ironic given the many left-wingers who talk about this would later go on to do the whole man versus bear discourse where they unironically would rather be mauled to death by a bear than see a random man in the woods. But I guess her feelings are somehow irrational. Going on to another claim is that the dog could hurt local wildlife. While it is possible, as there have been instances of dogs occasionally killing wild animals, these are usually feral dogs, and frankly, it's grossly exaggerated, as for the most part, it's really cats that are extremely deadly. In fact, it's been hypothesized that cats have killed more birds than people who died in the Holocaust. So, yeah, cats are awful, but let's just say it's not some major crime to let your dog walk without a leash. Plus, the majority of the park is no leash. So, it's understandable that someone who maybe is new, maybe didn't see the sign, that's perfectly reasonable, that they might not know, and it's just, man, silly to get angry at this. Plus, this is Central Park. It's not exactly a pristine nature preserve. The third claim I'd like to discuss is that she intentionally called him black hysterically in order to try and get him hurt. This is not true. The phone was breaking up, and she couldn't really get through to the person on the phone, something that regularly happens in the park due to shitty services. And frankly, what's racist about that? If you are being attacked by someone and the police officer asks you to describe them, what are you going to say, man? Like, he has glasses, gray hair? No, you're going to say that he's black. It makes sense why she would describe him as such. The fourth claim is that she was abusing / significantly hurting the dog by pulling on the leash. This is quite frankly stupid and indicates a lot of people who comment on the situation don't have dogs. Newsflash, even though I've never personally owned a dog due to a relative of mine being allergic, I have walked them, and sometimes you have to pull a dog's leash in order to protect them, such as stopping them from running into the street when a car is coming. Like, sure, it's not nice to do all the time, but it is understandable that sometimes you're gonna have to yank on the dog just so that he doesn't get hurt. That's understandable. Not helping the fact is that sometimes certain individuals will just loop the footage of her pulling on the dog to make it seem like it went on for a lot longer than it actually did, which was a few seconds. At the end of the day, due to all this misinformation, Amy Cooper's life was completely annihilated. She was doxxed, had her home address leaked, some of her family members faced huge amounts of death threats, lost her job at Franklin Templeton, forced to lose her dogs, and became a pariah hated by hundreds of thousands of people. Heck, she even lost her lawsuit against Franklin Templeton. And really, there are only 2 people who attempted to defend her, or at least give her a fair interview. First of those was by the Free Press by Kamel Foster. Said person would then get called an Uncle Tom or a white supremacist, despite being, black. Just kind of goes to show how that community views any disagreement, which, if anything, did not help her, despite it being an excellent interview. And I say that as someone who doesn't really like the Free Press. This interview was really good, though, and was how we learned that Christian Cooper had a history of violence. And Phil W. Books, who did an excellent series of videos that go into it even more detail than I do, that sadly has not really had much of an impact on the broader narrative due to his smaller subcount. I really suggest you go and, subscribe to his channel, because he actually makes somewhat decent videos, and I think you'll enjoy, at the very least, his video on this particular topic. I'd also like to do an honorable mention of Dev, who also talked about the incident, albeit in an unrelated video involving the city bike Karen. And his take was also pretty good. I just didn't mention it with the other 2 because it wasn't necessarily a video about her, so I didn't think it deserved as much, coverage.
This 70-second video created a firestorm of public outrage. Most Americans branded Amy Cooper as a terrible racist and moved on with their lives. Was her punishment justified? What about Christian? Did he deserve his acclaim and good fortune? Who was right? Who was wrong? I don't know for sure. I will say that I think Christian was a bully for the threat he made, the use of dog treats to agitate Amy, not to mention posting a video of someone's meltdown. None of this was graceful, kind, or understanding. He was ready for an argument. He had experience with these confrontations. He was ready with his dog treats. He was ready to video, and he was ready to post to the world. Amy had no idea what she was walking into.
This was a previous viral video from 2020 that had a similar trajectory as the nurse one. Progressives knee-jerk siding with the black man, calling the woman a racist white Karen, and later on context came out that she was actually in the right. But this time it wasn't even later on, because the guy who took this clip uploaded it with this caption on his Facebook page. So holy fuck, dude, this guy posted the clip with context showing he planned to steal her dog, and progressives just ignored it and called him the victim. They saw a crying white woman and heard a black accent behind the camera, and their minds were automatically made up, no brain power required. Media did comment on it though. They had the same story. White women use their whiteness and femininity to destroy black men. The woman in this video was actually fired from her job as a result of the incident, and was charged with filing a false police report. If this guy were white, I promise you, every single progressive who wanted to see her destroyed would have immediately flipped that script. Oh dude, it's the patriarchy. She's just a woman. He's approaching her. She has no one with her. All the men are rapists. The cops won't help her because they're the patriarchy too. She's obviously reasonable to be scared because a male is approaching her. But mention that the male is black, and all that logic goes out the fucking window. We are actually at a place now where progressives will let black people do anything, no matter how awful, and excuse it because of racism. The progs have been moving in that direction for a while now, but I think that George Floyd hyper-accelerated it. A black dude could actually rape a progressive woman at this point, and she would literally say it's reparations.
In contrast, Christian Cooper has absolutely thrived, writing both a mediocre comic, It's a Bird, and a book recounting his horrible struggles at racism due to yelling at those evil, filthy dog walkers. Both of these come off as very self-aggrandizing. Lastly, he even got an entire television show, Extraordinary Birder with Christian Cooper. Really got to make sure to put his name in the title there. Honestly, though, it's just kind of forgettable. There are far better nature documentaries about birds if you want them. There's, Planet Earth, obviously. There's Woodpeckers, The Whole Story of Hummingbirds, The Jeweled Messengers, and so many more that you should go and check those out if you actually want to learn about birds. Overall, the situation is a perfect case of a left-wing witch hunt. And before anyone accuses me of blaming the left on it, it is their fault. They are the side of people who did this, and I think it's silly to pretend otherwise. That frankly should have never gone viral in the first place. This was a interaction that could have been easily avoided if maybe Christian Cooper just talked to her calmly, or if, other things had happened. Honestly, Amy Cooper is no devil, and frankly the term Karen, I kind of look at it more and more as a, frankly, kind of a sexist label in some regard. Not always, but especially in some cases like this, and the, bike Karen, where they were basically harassing a pregnant woman, trying to prevent her from getting a freaking bike. And Christian Cooper is no perfect Christian angel. And I think both are stupid. If you really wanted to stop dog walkers, just ask them, man. No need to try and, engage in dog kidnapping via treats. It just makes you look unhinged. Now, you might ask how this event is relevant, as it might seem like an unrelated tangent, but it, alongside that certain individual's death, led to the creation of Black Birders Week, which is a racial identitarian annual online event lasting from the last week of May until the start of July. It was created by Jason Ward and Chelsea Connor, who seemingly haven't really done much outside of this, and sought out to deal with the racism supposedly rampant in the bird watching community. I'd like to congratulate these two knuckleheads for inserting race into arguably one of the hobbies that has the least need for it. Apparently, the founders seemingly are of the belief that black people are just too stupid to understand how to watch birds, unless they are there to educate them. Frankly, I find this whole group to be kind of a bigoted concept, segregating something that frankly should be non-racial at all. It is thanks to this group that the controversy of McCown's Longspur really set off. Firstly, and slightly less importantly, there are certain people who claim that the bird itself is racist.
This bird said the N-word.
Really sounded like the bird said the
sounded like the
N-word
bird
or
said the
something.
N-word.
This is, of course, absurd. While there are birds like parrots who can replicate human speech, the McCown's Longspur is not one. And even if it was, that wouldn't make it racist, because a bird repeating something a human says can't be racist. There's no intent behind it. They're just repeating something they heard. There's not really anything to it. It's just weird. It shows a lack of intelligence on this guy's part. Then again, what are we surprised by the pedantic pedestrians would have such a deranged take?
Like Negro Mandela.
But now that we've sort of refuted the fact that the bird itself is racist, we have to talk about something a little more significant. Remember the name of the person who first captured the specimens of this bird, John P. McCown? Well, yeah, he's a bit controversial due to having served in the American Civil War. Now, this video is not meant to be and won't be an in-depth discussion of it, as we've already sidelined this video and lengthened it enough. And besides, if I discuss the war in any level of nuance and treated it like any other conflict in human history worth multiple causes, I'll likely have some red tube college dropout tell me and yell at his fans that I'm some sort of lost causer, and I just don't want to deal with that nonsense, because heaven forbid you discuss a war in any level of nuance. So instead, let's talk about the man himself. For one, he, despite what Blue Sky and other idiots online may tell you, never owned any slaves, and instead only fought due to loyalty to his home state of Tennessee. And much like other rural young men at the time, they fought for that reason alone, and not due to any particular strong support of slavery. You ever hear the phrase, it was like a poor man's battle and a rich man's war? This guy was not a massive landowner. He was literally one of the poor people who fought for it. So, trying to paint him as this ravenous slave owner who hated black people is a bit of an over-exaggeration. Born around Siverville, Tennessee on August 19th, 1815, he, much like many young men in the area, went on to be recruited into the U.S. military and served in the Mexican-American and Seminole Wars. Far from a major leader, he had little, if any, influence on why or how these wars were started, but was a good enough soldier, I guess. After his service in the Mexican-American War, he served on the frontier where he was able to engage in his love for nature. There he made several significant discoveries in the study of birds. First and most obvious is, McCown's Longspur. I mean, heck, it bears his name both in the scientific name as well as his common name formerly, so we don't really need to talk about that. But he also discovered the enigmatic olive sparrow, Arenosompops rufigurgatus, which is an unusual bird for many reasons, and the ash-throated flycatcher, Myarchus inceransis. He also wrote a pretty significant early paper on the behaviors and habits of the greater roadrunner, Geococornyx californias, such as describing for the first time their behavior of breaking snail shells using old trees as a hammer to bash them against. He was also the first to record the desert cardinal Cardinalis sinatus, the vermilion flycatcher Pyrocephalus obscurus, the cactus wren Camptylorhynchus brunellicapillus, the great-tailed grackle Quercus mexicanus, the verdin Orocompus flaviceps, the green kingfisher Chlorokelly americana, and the black-bellied whistling duck Dinogynamus autumnalis for the first time in Texas. After his Civil War service, which despite some rumors spread about him by jealous and bitter Confederate leaders annoyed at his valid criticisms of their tactical failures, became a biology teacher and died on January 22nd, 1879. Now that we know who he was, is the common view of him used by the American Ornithological Society, which, much like the Entomological Society of America, which I discussed in my Gypsy Moth video, itself not really a scientific organization that does actual field research, instead being little more than an elitist club/society that has no real scientific authority to justify the change accurate? Well, no. He owned no slaves and made a number of significant discoveries. Plus, he literally discovered the animal itself and even has his name permanently part of its scientific name. And if you're trying to argue that we should change the scientific name, that's a whole other can of worms that you do not want to get into and would fundamentally undermine the entirety of the biology sciences. Because the whole point of Latin names is that they are stable. That way people know what people are talking about. And they're only really altered or gotten rid of if they are part of an already existing species. Like someone describes species A and then species B, but species B turns out to be the same species as species A. And so by changing this one species, it would lead to a cascade effect that would basically render the whole system irrelevant and not useful. So we probably shouldn't do that. Plus, the alternative name is just not that great. Sure, at first glance, the thick-billed Longspur sounds more descriptive, but especially in the context of seeing living animals in comparison with other Longspurs, the differences really aren't that vast. Its beak is not particularly thick. Indeed, as a form of comparison, look at the Darwin finches. Despite being more related to one another than McCown's Longspur is to other Longspurs, they have far more substantial differences. Meanwhile, the quote-unquote thick-billed Longspur, you'd be hard-pressed to differentiate to this species in the field by bill size. So it's arguably worse than the old name, in that it actively promotes something that isn't all that useful. So in conclusion, what's the deal with this bird's name and why does it matter? Well, it's quite frankly a victim of a broader movement of supposed progress involving race, which seeks to scrub the history of anything that could possibly be deemed problematic, which is quite frankly childish because it entirely relies on whatever is currently considered progressive, and will probably change in the future, and is based on an interaction like the Central Park bird watching incident that frankly was so overblown, as well as trying to condemn a man that quite frankly wasn't all that bad in terms of like the broader historical context. At the end of the day, this sort of one bird would serve as a sort of a foot in the door for increasing identitarian censorship. We've seen other people start to suffer this fate, like Audubon, who contributed way more than McCown did, and you can't as easily justify removing his name from things. But it was this one bird that sort of was the weak link. And as such, I feel it's worth defending and discussing this in a way that is more intellectually honest than a lot of other people do. At the end of the day, I hope I've been able to inform you of this shockingly contentious affair on a fairly unremarkable bird to an extent that you can now form your own opinion instead of just parroting what other people may have told you. At the end of the day, though, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Maybe you personally think the change is justified. In my view, the change is stupid, especially as someone from the American South. But, if you have any thoughts you would like to share, leave them down below. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who already don't like me who will probably use this video I made against me. This video ballooned far longer than I originally planned it to be, and as someone who doesn't really like birds, this will likely be the only one I make about birds for some time. Now, maybe eventually I'll do an extinct bird iceberg, but that will likely be the last clade of animals I do. Hopefully, this was very informational to you people, for not just the species, but birds as a whole. Hopefully, the next one-off nature video will be much shorter, which it will, and cover some sort of arthropod group that I find interesting. If you liked the video, like it, but if you loved it, consider sharing it around and subscribing. While this may make some people upset, the truth is the truth. Nothing more. Have a wonderful day, and take care.